All right, Tupac, MC New York, Baltimore Years, Part 2. Start off where I left off, page 10. The battle was Zorian's beef. Somehow, I had become involved, but still my sights were set on the unprecedented performance. The next 2 weeks were spent practicing and preparing for it. The impending battle barely crossed my mind. As our musical support, Gerard and I enlisted Todd Miller, who was the best guitar player in the school, and John Timokis, who was the best drummer. With great attention to detail, the four of us worked the two-song routine to an exact science. We were performing perfection and walked this way by Run DMC. This was our big opportunity when the day arrived. We were ready. The ball began at 8 o'clock in the evening. The school took on a different look, a different vibe in the evening. There were new shadows, new things highlighted under the concentrated glare of unusually bright lights. A haunting silence periodically broken by random sound. The dark, skinny halls stacked upon each other 7 stories high in the retrofitted antique hotel were like mysterious catacombs resonating with the faint sounding music of late night dance exercises from some far off corner of the school, or the echo of 2 lone voices reciting lines. Gerard and I emerged from the locker room on the basement floor, decked in our Run DMC outfits of black imitation leather pants and jackets, shell head Adidas with no shoestrings, black t-shirts, fake fat gold chains, and black hats. Completing the effect, I donned a pair of fake gazelle eyeglasses, black with gold color around the lenses. With an air of expectation, we climbed the basement steps to the first floor and entered the ballroom. It was already teeming with people dressed in all sorts of strange outfits, from guys in long dresses and heavy makeup to the more traditional costumes of Dracula and the like. 2 years before I might have found this spectacle shocking and unnerving. 2 years before I might have found this spectacle shocking and unnerving. But as a veteran of the school, I was duly desensitized. It was normal. All I now saw around me was a growing audience. After half an hour or so of milling around and enjoying the party, the four of us walked up on stage and got ready. Seeing us take the stage, everyone redirected their attention. Before I knew it, Todd and John were rocking it like professional musicians on the drums and electric guitar. Gerard and I easily got into the flow. Swaggering comfortably about the stage, we hit every line perfectly, like clockwork. We sounded good. I felt like a star up there, working the enthusiastic crowd, doing all of Run DMC's signature moves and mannerisms perfectly, and having a ball. It was even better than I had hoped. Toward the end of our first song, Perfection, I spotted Tupac in the crowd. There was no limit of admiration in his eyes. I mean, there was no hint of admiration in his eyes. He stood there still, oblivious to the hyped up students around him. A shorter, equally thin, brown-skinned gal was standing next to him, also still. They appeared to be together. When my eyes met Tupac's, he locked on. When my eyes met Tupac's, he locked on, glaring at me squarely, challenging, and voicing with his very eyes, "You ready?" He held no regard for my moment in the sun. I tried not to look at him again. My little taste of pubescent fame, my long-awaited, carefully planned moment in the spotlight, he wished nothing more than to take from me. But I couldn't help. it, and glanced back several times, and still the same stolid expression, no detection of any movement in either of them. I brushed it off through the remainder of the short set, but it remained in the back of my mind. When we finished, Gerard and I raised our fists in the air, victoriously smiling widely to the cheers of the crowd, many of whom probably didn't know our names, despite the smallness of the school and its student body. I stepped down from the stage, eager to collect the praise of my friends and curious looks of interest from those I didn't know. But Tupac would have none of it. As my forward foot hit the ballroom floor and stepping down from the stage, the skinny kid dressed as if for a school dance of an entirely different sort, black dress shoes, black slacks of polyester or some similar looking material, a dark cardigan sweater, and dark dress shirt underneath, almost the exact same outfit I had seen him in several times before in school, walked right up to me. "You ready?" He said coldly, exactly as I had heard it the first time while in the midst of the performance. There was nothing to do but reply in the affirmative and abort my hard-earned victory lap. There was nothing to do but reply in the affirmative and abort my hard-earned victory lap, setting out instead to collect Zorian and the rest of the crew. In the middle of the crowded ballroom, Tupac immediately entered a zone, what I would later come to recognize as his zone. A switch tripped inside him. "Come on, y'all. We're gonna battle. We're gonna battle," he said several times, corralling the students around him, motioning toward the door of the ballroom. Now the spotlight would rest where it should, where it belonged, and as far as he was concerned, on him. We walked out of the ballroom into the hall and down the steps leading to the lunchroom and locker rooms, the crowd growing with every step. I looked down to my shoestringless Adidas flopping about and slapping against the towel. Gerard and I were still clad in our slick black outfits. Zorian, Kendrick, and Ernest were in regular clothes. I fidgeted with my glasses. The gold coloring of the frame gleamed under the fluorescent light of the lamps. The whole way down the steps, I fingered the iconic representation of the very soul of the hip-hop culture, as if to summon some hidden genie, more so than to achieve a more comfortable alignment. When we hit the basement floor, we all stopped in the hall outside the cafeteria, near the locker rooms. The crowd gathered around us. Tupac and a friend of his who none of us had seen before. Zorian, Kendrick, Ernest, and me, Gerard, deferring to the four of us in regard to rhyming talent, stood off to the side, making himself one of the crowd. Tupac posted up against the wall, leaning against it, with his arms folded, looking completely unconcerned and at ease. He introduced his companion as Mouse, aka Dana, a partner of his from his neighborhood. After everyone settled around in a circle, it was immediately obvious why Mouse was there. "Yo, D, box!" Tupac exclaimed, just as LL Cool J had in that tense scene in Crush Groove. Mouse's beatbox ripped through the crowd of students, influencing all to begin moving in time. Broad smiles erupted on bobbing heads. Several softly voiced expletives expressing approval peppered the air. It was on. Right on beat, Tupac stood himself up and jumped in with a dope-ass rhyme. "You can't stop me," he hurled from deep inside, kicking off the battle with authority, rocking it. The two of them were in perfect harmony, playing off one another, bouncing lyrics back and forth like a perfectly passed ball maneuvered too quickly for the eye to follow. It was clear they had practiced extensively from the very first moment. It was painfully obvious that we had entered an arena in which we did not belong, one in which we were obviously underexperienced and unfamiliar. The two-man hit squad of cardion sweater donning sophomores who looked more like altar boys than rap artists crushed the four of us decisively. With unbelievable skill and execution, they nailed each and every line of each rhyme. After Zorian and the rest of our crew ran out of rhymes, they continued on, ripping more than seven in total before it was all over. Zorian, Ernest, and Kendrick were quickly demoralized, surrendering early on. I saw Gerard join in with the crowd, jocking all of Tupac and Mouse's stuff, but I refused to concede defeat so easily. Desperately, I relaunched and attacked, resorting to old, stale rhymes, since I had exhausted all of my current material, but it was useless. After my last relatively sad attempt, they dropped the sickle on our necks, delivering the final blow. As if in reply to what I had just thrown out in desperation, they busted out with, "You're talking that bullshit," their grand finale. Everyone completely zapped out at this. Mouse went crazy on the beatbox, and the entire crowd danced along, yelling out their approval, jeering. In grand fashion, Tupac had dethroned Zorian and won the distinction of undisputed king of rap, and we were embarrassed in front of what seemed to be the entire student body. I cannot explain to you the full extent of the embarrassment. Not only was I denied the fruits of my well-orchestrated moment in the limelight, but I was humiliated in its stead. That night I saw exactly what had gotten Herb so hyped. This kid was extremely talented. Now we move on to Chapter 2, Roland Park. Tupac's tenure in Baltimore began in the winter of 1984 when he arrived from New York with his sister and mother at age 13. His first day of school proved to be typical of his life and suggested of the recurring tragedy that would haunt him until the final curtain. The zone school for his neighborhood was Roland Park Middle, although a magnet school as well, attracting many of the brightest students from around the Baltimore area, and one of the top two public middle schools in the city. Roland Park Middle had in its zone some of the worst neighborhoods in the metropolitan area, located in the northeast section of Baltimore. The school serves several of the poorest communities and most notorious drug hotspots, namely Tupac's own neighborhood, the Greenmount Avenue Old York Road corridor. Consequently, the school could be a difficult environment. On his first day in mid-November, he walked into homeroom late, conspicuous under the spotlight shone over the heads of the class long since seated. He wore baggy pants of thin blue fabric like surgical scrubs, with staples encircling the bottom of each leg along the hem. The pants hung loosely from his skinny frame, below a generic long-sleeved shirt tucked in at the waist, where a drawstring held the rag-tag ensemble in place. His hair was lopsided like some two-tiered wannabe Bobby Brown cut, and he exposed poorly kept unfinished braces along both rows of teeth with every parting of his lips. Only the metal anchors were in place on each tooth. No wires connected them. Not only did he enter his potentially brutal environment looking like a walking target, but he did so almost 3 months into the school year, after all of the students had long since felt each other out and made their key alliances for the year. Employing little fanfare, Miss G, the teacher, acknowledged the new student's presence and pointed him to an open seat. Within seconds of his taking it, an unusually large boy returned from the bathroom and marched straight up to him. Apparently, the teacher had unwittingly led the new student to an occupied seat. Sensing the opportunity for an incident, students began to egg on Fat Will with taunts of, "Bang that nigga," and "Take your shit back." When the oversized two-time eighth grader demanded in front of the class that Tupac get up, but the funny-looking skinny new kid would not be swayed and stood up to the much larger challenger defiantly in his face. "Miss G told me to sit here. Miss G told me to sit here," Tupac told Fat Will, refusing to move. "She don't see no problem with it," he argued indignantly, before Miss G quickly stepped in to break up the fray, apologizing from her desk for the oversight and asking Tupac to take another seat. He had only followed instructions, yet he found himself faced with a certain beatdown in front of his new classmates, all because of his steadfast refusal to acquiesce behind someone else's error. The kids of the school and his neighborhood, for that matter, did not take to Tupac very well at all. To them, he looked funny, like some kind of square reject type. At that time in Baltimore, clothing was the key. Baltimore sisters looked first to a guy's tennis shoes for their initial, most lasting impression. And by the time their eyes reached his face, they had taken in his entire ensemble from socks to hat. Within Baltimore's variety of the growing hip-hop culture, there was a strict dress code. For every type of clothing, there were several brands from which to choose, and no deviation was permitted. There were certain brands of jeans, tennis shoes, sweatsuits, jackets, shorts, and even undershirts and glasses. The expensive undershirts were worn as shirts, and the gaudy, heavy gold-rimmed glasses bore no suggestion of intellectualism. The boys defiantly thought of themselves as slickheads or yo boys, and these slickheads distinguished themselves primarily through the brands and abundance of their clothing. Underlying the outer display was the insinuation of thuggery with regard to one's ability to acquire and retain such expensive and showy articles in the midst of poverty and want. Drug dealing and robbery were already common ingredients in and around the lives of the young middle schoolers. During this period, young boys were regularly sticking each other up and even murdering one another for lambskin coats, starter NBA college jackets, patent leather tennis shoes, gold chains, and even gold teeth. It was all about attitude, heart. And in Baltimore City, attitude and attire were one. Although Tupac had plenty of attitude, always carrying about him a certain defiant flavor for his fiercely strict dress code, he possessed none of the expected items. Nor did he have an imposing physique or demeanor with which to trump the process. As Mouse later put it, he tried to have a b-boy thing going on, but the brokenness always showed through. Tupac's mother was far too poor to buy him any of the expensive items, and probably too sophisticated to fall prey to such nonsense if she could. And Tupac was much more artist than hustler or stick-up bandit, so he went without, and so he was dismissed out of hand. However, for Tupac, this painful rebuke and contempt from his peers only meant valuable space in which to realize years ahead of his time his own interests and deepest passions, unencumbered with the flustering barrage of perceived limit and normal daily thought typical to the, in some real sense, distracted development of a mainstream socialite. Tupac explored the depths of his desire and potential in rap and drama with unbelievable focus and intensity. His maturity in general, as well as the maturity of his work in these areas, were exceptional. On his third day at the school, the students were instructed to recite in music class their original poems, which they had completed for homework the previous night. No one took the effort seriously, laughing clumsily through their lame, half-hearted attempts. Many offered the half-plagiarized, inflated words of Hallmark cards and the like, but Tupac's piece was entirely different. He presented an impressive poem that intelligently detailed his love for a girl. It was a masterful consideration of the finer nuance in the relationship between love and beauty, true beauty, and how the latter had set ablaze the former. So well thought out and skillfully presented was this unmatched piece that not even the most ignorant and defiant attempted to satirize or ridicule. When later that day he boarded the bus to go home, he found all of the seats taken except for one next to a short guy from his class who had been the principal instigator 2 days before during the incident with Fat Will. Only after Tupac walked all the way up to the guy and asked loudly, "Excuse me," did the guy begrudgingly move his book bag from the seat and allowed Tupac to sit down. The tension was thick. Neither of them said anything to each other for quite some time. Tupac sitting quietly and the guy steadily engaging all of those around him in conversation. Finally, the guy turned to Tupac and broke the ice by telling him that he liked his poem from earlier that day. "I liked yours too," Tupac replied, accepting the gesture. The guy then asked Tupac where he lived and where he was from. Tupac replied that he was from New York, but he was currently living on Greenmount Avenue. It turned out that they lived in the very same East Baltimore neighborhood, their homes only blocks apart. The guy's name was Mouse. Tupac kicked another rhyme that Mouse really liked, and Mouse invited him to the neighborhood playground to hang out. Mouse would later realize that the rhyme Tupac kicked on the bus that day as his own was really a Curtis Blow cut, not yet familiar in Baltimore. Tupac was well aware of the advantage afforded him by the pioneering spirit of his hometown, and he would use his New York experience, his New York identity repeatedly throughout his development as an artist and as a young man. Widely known around the neighborhood, Mouse was king of the beatbox and little nephew to the sultans of the neighborhood dope trade. This status he also enjoyed in school, as everyone in the neighborhood attended the same one, Roland Park. At school, in the valuable minutes between classes, the boys would regularly congregate in the halls or bathrooms where a cipher would easily take shape. The big thing of the day was breakdancing, and this was always the focus, each of the boys showing off his latest moves. Lyricism and rhyming hadn't yet taken hold in Baltimore. The music was primarily imported from New York and Philadelphia, while the broader tenets of hip-hop, especially breakdancing, were a way of life to be mastered and flaunted. Mouse would often call these ciphers to order, sending an irresistibly loud and infectious beatbox careening through the halls, amplified masterfully by the adept positioning of the source with respect to the surrounding walls, floor, and ceiling. In the hallway, guys might begin to chant in unison the latest jam out on the radio or join in on the beat with the help of surrounding lockers. And in the bathrooms, they would quickly break down to the floor and bust out their latest move, whether it be a windmill with no hands, flailing feet barely missing the sinks along the wall and quickly reacting onlookers, or a head spin done in a wool skull cap worn to school specifically for the purpose. As classmates and in such close proximity to each other in the neighborhood, Tupac and Mouse quickly gelled together. Within a matter of days, they were hanging together as much in school as in the neighborhood. As Mouse's friend and a genuine hip-hop enthusiast in his own right, Tupac naturally gravitated to the hallway bathroom sessions despite all of the cracks and overt resistance to his acceptance. He was certainly no breakdancer or a dancer of any kind for that matter, but as was the case with most young black kids in the inner cities of America in the 80s, he and hip-hop were one. And wherever the growing culture was taking root and sprouting most gloriously, he could be found making offerings of water and his own special nourishment. Tupac's thing was flow, rhyme skills coming from New York, where the making of the music were as big a pursuit for cats on the street, as was vibing around it and dancing to it, and being clumsily unsuited for the latter. Tupac's focus was different from that of the kids in Baltimore at the time. I'm ending on page 21. Be continued. MC New York.